What's up? Publicus here. Yeah, I can't do that shit. Anyway, let's talk about something else crazy and futurist and all that stuff. God, my eyes just freaking too much or what? Ugh. I have allergies or something. Anyway, so let's talk about space tourism, trade, and travel. Or, as I like to think of it, Orion's Arrow. This is part two of the Arcadia initiative. How the second part of it will expand into space. Yeah, I said space trade. Who are we going to trade with? Little green men? No. No. That's not the point. The point is once you have localized economies with the Arcadia initiative, this can produce nationalistic trading blocks. Sort of like NAFTA, but without all the disenfranchisement and without all the international trading. Sort of like carbon trading, but except it's kind of economically egalitarian in a way. Sort of like anarcho-capitalism if it was centered around a microeconomic basis instead of a macroeconomic basis. If I even know what I'm talking about in these terms, which I'm probably getting wrong. So, but let's say I got that right, and it's about a closed loop where individuals can make the best of the money in a economically progressive society. It's still small government, but it's just big. Well, it's like a big fish tank that supports the smaller fish. And that's how I can explain that. But what this would do is it wouldn't make the world a utopia. It wouldn't make it one of those, retro-futurist kind of white tower kind of global paradises where you see all those cool buildings everywhere. You can see it now. All you have to do is look on YouTube and see all these fantastic buildings that no one can afford. Well, okay, so a near post-scarcity future, however they would solve some of their social problems, because when you have more prosperity, invariably it's taken up by people moving out of the economic niche of subsistence living and therefore somehow managing to balance themselves with nature while not just being lemmings and just populating all over the place, and therefore driving everything back down into poverty. And no, I don't believe in eugenics or authoritarian population controls, so that might be the problem with my whole ideas right there. But this is about space. Now, it's true that with a localized energy infrastructure, you wouldn't really need to travel very far in life. Matter of fact, commerce would be traded, and since everywhere would have a centralized hub, it would also be a WiMAX area where internet and things would be produced from one area, which would just reach to the next, to the next, to the next. Everywhere would have a regional hub of WiMAX, which is like Wi-Fi, but WiMAX is like broadcasting reach. So you could pretty much have a global network, an internet network. Now, what this would do, supposedly, if the population didn't explode because of all the more available resources freed, would create a global situation where space became an option for those who wish to travel. Considering that it would even be a necessity because it would be a need for fast travel. The need actually for jet airlines and a jet airline industry might drastically reduce. Or it might go back to the age of super zeppelins. Or actually, these ideas they have of these floating hotels, which are like cruise ships or small cities, even that just float. Like floating resorts. There's actually mention of this in reality. Okay, but in any case, my idea is to take the Jeff Rutan space plane with that kind of flexible wing and basically have something like a DC-3, or not DC-3, something like a 747 where it shifts. Because if you ever notice, you ever seen a picture of the space shuttle and the 747? They're almost the same design, except one has blunted wings and no back wings. Now, how would this work? Well, one technology to make this work would be that it would be as big as the space shuttle booster, but it would take off and land just like a regular airplane, except it would overcome the high velocity re-entry problem because the wings would flex and it would just come in like that. And see, once that hits on the belly, that dramatically slows the plane down, and therefore it takes away the problem of high speed re-entries, like you have with a space plane or a space shuttle. So in that case, one thing that would fuel this, since there would be a high thing of bio-oil, a high volume supply of oil, would be to create these jets, well, jets and rockets, a jet rocket mix that would use paraffin or candle wax. So while this will be in ample supply, it can easily be made using a variable thrust rocket. What this is that this means that this rocket will not be a solid booster ignition sequence rocket like you see on the space shuttles or on the other things, which means it has its oxygen built into it, but it has a separate tank for it so it can have variable thrust. What that means is that you could take oxygen in from oxygen inlets and use some of your fuel, and then when you get up to height, you can have a spare oxygen tank as a combustible mix. There's a proper term for it. I think it's a two-stroke rocket or hybrid rocket or something. I should have looked it up, but In any case, what what it does is that it means you can hold on. Database went off. Okay, there. I think it's stopped now. Okay, good.
That freezes everything up. Technology at its best. In any case, what that would do is it would create a viable space plane. So once you have a viable space plane, when you need to take materials and people from one place to another, this would be how you would do it. The reason this would be important is because it would create. Well, actually, what you want to do is you want to take away subsidies from the airline industry and get rid of the space industry. What you want to do is put the money before the money before the how am I trying to say this? You want the money incentive to be part of space travel. So the three ways to do this. The first way is not tourism because it's too limited. The first way is travel. And travel is airline industries. So instead it would be an airline industry, which would be aerocraft. Yeah, I know it's kind of fancy dancy, but instead of airliners, you'd have aeroliners. And that way, it would be like a space plane that traveled up to the low Earth's atmosphere, went to where it had to go to a location, and then landed. And in this, it would cut travel time, and when the money is put in front of the technology, it would innovate because there would be profit to be made. You see, instead of just setting up shuttles and private enterprises where there's really no money. Now, the second part is tourism. Because once you have a near post-scarcity society, you will have more money to spend. It will have a dynamic global economy, and therefore you'll have people who become newly rich and incentive to be rich just to get into the upper echelons of where the various perks are. The base living expenses won't be so bad, but the incentives for being rich would be the sky's the limit. 80 miles high and doing fine. You know. So that's the point of Orion. That's one point of Orion's arrow, is to get up into space, to put money before space travel. So therefore, you would have travel. Okay, the second part is tourism. Tourism in space hotels, space stops, space cafes, whatever, and even to the moon, where these ships can land. So, you have that dream. Then, and this is just basically, if anything else, money to burn from the money that can be taken from disposable income of the new rich. Now, this would be useful for two things. One, once you get space hotels, you develop the infrastructure to have a manned presence in space. Once you have a manned presence in space and have an infrastructure for that, through travel, through tourism, then you develop trade. And with trade, I mean space industry. I'm talking things that can't be produced in a gravity well. Space trade to produce items that can be built into orbit, like factories for new innovations in medicine, industry, anything that you could use in a zero-G environment that would pay for itself. Now that is very important. And things like power. Because once you have an easy way to access solar satellites and other energy power systems, you go from an almost post-scarcity environment to possibly a full post-scarcity environment. Because with solar satellites and other things, other techniques, I can't call any others offhand, but if you're beaming microwaves down to relay stations, you have, with the cost of creating satellites and putting them up, a very low cost to startup cost. Well, not low cost, it's probably pretty expensive, but you'll probably get more power out of it than you put in it. It will be a net positive. In other words, you'll get more money out of it than you put into it. Right? Okay? So, we will have one resource that we didn't have before. Now, when you create that, you create a whole other aspect of possibilities for space travel and space exploration. And that would be manufacturing ships in orbit. And from there, you could create facility size, you could create complex size vehicles or flying institutions. I'm going to say institutions. Well, just flying facilities, installations, yes, that could journey to Mars, anywhere. And one of the big things you're going to find is that this will be a renewed interest in scientific and industrial solar system exploration. We haven't even opened up the solar system. And that's near Earth and far. And that is completely a beneficial aspect to humanity. Why, we could set up things in the orbit of freaking Mercury that could be solar satellites, or just anywhere. You know, energy, just directly. And materials, there's a lot of asteroids around. So, there is an aspect of space industry, and that puts us almost to the stars. Now, once you get this energy surplus, you could get so much space capital. Oh, and by the way, you should talk about V-guns, which are like super guns, which is like that Saddam Hussein thing, which was originally an idea from Jules Verne, which was compressed gas in various sections. I'm going to get this right. Various sections that go up and have gas behind it, and then it shoots what kind of materials you want out of that gun and into orbit. It's the cheapest way to put things into orbit. So there's no difficulty of supplying materials into space. Yes, and it could have military applications. Well, once you're in space, you have the high ground. But that's a militarization of space, and that would be a difficult question to answer in a manned space society. So you see, this is to the point where we get to Orion's Arrow. Like I said, those institutions or installations I meant that were built in orbit or wherever in the solar system, if you have an active solar system infrastructure, would be able to create enough antimatter or whatever kind of power source you want to use to send these things to the stars. You could create something in away from Earth that would have no chance of falling back on it. Some installation around, well, I don't know, not the moon, but Mars or somewhere where it would actually create, you could, or maybe closer into the sun, that you create huge quantities of energy and you have access to certain materials outside of a big gravity well, like a moon somewhere, some small moon. And then from there, you go ahead and you actually create this big complex, and then you shoot it off at super fast speed, maybe using some kind of nuclear power, like the Orion project. And then once it gets up to a very fast speed, you have that stage fall away, and this is unmanned, this is robotic, and the rest of it powers on ion power, which gradually increases it more and more and more, like these ion engines we do have now. So from there, it's already going at very fast speed. You pick it up, and that means in 10 to 20 years, or maybe 100 years, we can have things, probes, huge probes, the size of installations, installations that could be reaching near Earth stars. And that's what really I would like to see, is just a frigging broadcast, before my life, which I know I'll never see, but of some exoplanet that's in like Alpha Centauri or Tau Ceti or the Vega system or something within a 10 to 15 light year radius. That would be totally great. And that's Orion's Arrow. Would be these ships that could friggin' trailblaze robotically just to give us an eye view of these planets. Planetary probes. Wouldn't that be great? I think that's the whole point of making all this techno-agrarian stuff and and all these things, or maybe just pyramid building to friggin' get a pretty picture of some other star. But mind you, if we ever do get the technology to get even halfway, or no, I think, that's right. It's 0.82, basically 3/4 of the speed of light. It will have the time dilation effect will start to be noticeable. So in a society that already has an infrastructure in its solar system, going faster than light really doesn't matter. Because if you get the people on these ships that have the power to go there, and it's safe to go there because probes have already mapped out the course, Considering you don't hit some asteroid or something going at point 0.8 light, 0.82% of friggin' light speed, uh, what you'll see is that the time dilation effect will actually have the same effect as in Star Trek, Next Generation, where it has that Doppler effect. Because you're not actually going faster than light, but since time slows, it will seem like you are to you because your time is slowing. So it's like the twin paradox. The twin comes back to Earth an old man and the other one's young. Well, the one in the spaceship is young. Well, he's still going to be young if he goes to the other star. So you see, if you've got a big, huge colony ship that's going that fast, and everyone and everything you care about is there on your colony ship, who cares about Earth? I mean, I wouldn't. Just put the friggin' crystal ship in friggin' overdrive and friggin' take it to Tau Ceti. And let's give it a look there. After the robot probes have gone and found out that there's a friggin' habitable planet. No one's on it, or nothing's on it. Why not? I think it'd be fun. So, yep, that's Orion's Arrow. Yeah, poor man's Star Trek. But what the hell, right? That's how you get to the stars.